Well, it's my pleasure to be with you today to introduce our next panel. I'd like to first thank Senator Reid and the other sponsors of the National Clean Energy Summit for bringing together leaders of business and institutions and government to really focus on energizing tomorrow. And we've started participating in this event since its inception in 2008. And at that time, we were talking a lot about what could be done. And now we're talking about what is being done. So it's great to be part of that. And we have been part, as our company, part of Nevada's growth in renewable energy. We started with a natural gas-fired power plant, a very clean one, and now we've added about 450 megawatts of renewable energy in Boulder City area. As a leader of a Fortune 500 company that delivers clean energy to over 31 million consumers, we have been able to see how important it is for policymakers to work together to find ways that can benefit both customers and shareholders and the environment. And you can see, and you will hear from our panel today, that truly is possible. And Nevada here serves as a great example of a pro-growth state that has also been able to attract clean energy investment. Over the last 16 years, we've worked closely with the Nevada state and local leaders to develop and operate the natural gas and renewable energy infrastructure. And our Copper Mountain Solar Complex is one of the largest photovoltaic solar plants in the United States, currently delivering 150 megawatts with 300 additional megawatts in construction to be completed in the next 2 years, right here in Nevada. We have spent over $1 billion in this state, and that is a great example of how investment is attracted to states that set really strong policy goals. In California, my home state, where we serve 25 million consumers, we've been fortunate that under the visionary leadership of our current and prior governor, one of who will be on our panel today, the state has implemented policies to promote cleaner energy investments while at the same time enhancing electric reliability. And let me share a couple examples. California benefits from a regulatory model that promotes energy efficiency. The utilities in California do not make more money by selling more energy. They make money from investing in energy infrastructure and in helping customers find more efficient ways of using energy. And this policy has kept California's energy use per customer relatively flat for 3 decades, while the rest of the U.S. has increased by about 50%. California also has a renewable portfolio standard that's one of the highest in the country, 33% by 2020. And our company has actually experienced integrating renewables into the grid because we now operate with over 20% of our energy coming from renewable resources last year. We strongly support renewable portfolio standards and have learned firsthand how important natural gas also is to helping manage the grid when you have a lot of renewables. Energy efficiency, renewables, and natural gas must be integrated to create that clean, reliable energy system. And in addition to electric generation, and you'll probably hear about this from the panelists, one of the largest sources of emissions is vehicles. In my home state of California, 35% of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from vehicles. So state efforts to put policies in place to encourage alternate fuel vehicles are key. Looking across the U.S., the combination of state renewable portfolio standards, targeted clean energy incentives championed by those like Senator Reid and other members of Congress have enabled companies like ours to become a leading developer of solar and wind. Since 2008, we have invested over $2 billion in projects that have created thousands of jobs, and you heard that from the prior speaker, strengthened local economies, and helped us move to that clean energy future. But reducing energy is truly a global issue, and this is something that we have to look at as we set our policies. We see tremendous potential for improving energy security and reducing global emissions through greater use of our plentiful and affordable domestic natural gas. And our company is part of doing things in that area, helping power plants to convert from coal in the United States and to convert from fuel oil to natural gas in Mexico. We're also building liquefied natural gas export facilities to bring clean energy to our allies abroad. We believe that a combination of all of the above strategy endorsed by our president is where our future is in energy. And I appreciate the opportunity to give you these introductory comments. And now, please help me welcome our panelists. Clean Energy Project Chair, Rose McKinney-James. Governor Martin O'Malley. Governor Jennifer Granholm. And Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Thank you, Deborah. How exciting it is to be introduced by a female CEO of a utility. Hello. Well, good morning, everyone. I really am honored to be here. This is my 6th summit, and I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to moderate this panel. I'm truly honored to be with 3 very distinguished public servants, and we're going to talk about a handful of things. But before we get started, I want you to know that I am once again armed with technology. And I'm going to ask those of you who are interested in submitting some questions to do so by text. And the text number is pretty easy, 22333. And we're going to review those requests and select a few and integrate them into our discussion. So energy efficiency, renewable portfolio standard goals, fuel efficient vehicles, innovation in technology, renewables, all topics that are very important for the clean energy conversation. But states play a very significant role in how these policies are actually implemented. And so I want to engage you in a conversation understanding that we have 3 states with very different demographics. You all have very different backgrounds, and I encourage you to take a look at the detailed biographical information in the program and very different approaches to clean energy. I want you to help us understand the how and the why supporting your efforts. But most importantly, I'd like for you to begin helping us to understand the solutions so that advocates and industry and those involved have a better perspective on how to move forward. So as we focus on this, I have a choice. I could have done this alphabetically. I could have done this based on states. But since I'm from Detroit, Governor Granholm. Yeah. I'd like to talk to you about partnerships and the private sector and how we work with federal agencies. You've done some very innovative things in Michigan, and I think if you could help us frame this conversation around the approaches that you took while you were in office.
Yeah, in fact, this issue of public-private partnerships is so critical in this conversation, I think. I was having a conversation with Bill Ford Jr. when I was governor, and he was really stressing that everybody has a role to play, that government has a role to play, the private sector has a role to play, and certainly the education community, particularly higher ed, have a role to play. And so for governors, and I know these 2 have been very instrumental in public-private partnerships in their states, but in Michigan, this was all about jobs. This was all about trying to figure out ways to incentivize the private sector to work with the universities and bring in jobs for our citizens. We had an economy, because of Michigan's reliance on the automotive industry, we had an economy that was really balanced, with a table balanced on one leg, which was the auto industry, and you can't really balance an economy on one leg. So adding new sectors became part of our focus, and energy was one of the sectors that we went after. And inside of energy, obviously that's a very broad field, we wanted to go after advanced manufacturing, obviously in partnership with the private sector. Well, when President Obama came into office and the Recovery Act put out through the Department of Energy a competition for battery technology to be able to be located in the United States, we said, we are all in. So I got my legislature, which was a divided legislature, a legislature that had a lot of the same people or philosophies that the president is running against in Washington. But when it comes to jobs, and when it comes to the ability to partner with the private sector and to using the tax code to be able to provide the incentives for that to happen, everybody was all in. And so we created an economic cluster around the lithium-ion battery for the electric vehicle. We said we are the place where vehicle 1.0 was going to be built. We wanted to be the place where vehicle 2.0 was going to be built. And so we created centers of energy excellence in partnership with particular companies and particular universities and government funding. We created a whole cluster of innovation. We got more than half of all of the battery grants that were awarded through that competition in Michigan. And as a result, through that partnership between government, industry, and education, we were able to attract 17 battery companies and the supply chain for those companies, $5.8 billion in investment, projected 63,000 jobs just in the electric vehicle space. So that, to me, is a role for government. Government has a role. We can't just be hands-off when our economic competitors are out there eating us for lunch.
So, economic development, job creation. Governor O'Malley, you are right in the thick of it. You're a sitting governor. You have shown tremendous leadership. I want to talk to you about your climate change plan and also have you weigh in a little on your work on offshore wind, which has some very interesting dynamics.
Sure. Like Governor Granholm, in Maryland, we believe that our #1 priority has to be job creation. As my friend Paul Hawken is fond of pointing out, we're the only species on the planet that doesn't have full employment. So we have nearly recovered all of the jobs we lost in the recession, but a big part of our comeback has been to dial up this sector of our economy that are the new technologies, the new industries that come from pursuing the goal of reducing energy consumption by 15% statewide, achieving a renewable energy portfolio standard of 20% by 2022, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2025. So we've moved our state over the last 7 years from being really down at the back of the pack and led by examples of other states like California. We have now moved our state up so that we have the 7th highest concentration of green jobs of any state in the union now, and we have the highest concentration of green jobs of any state in the mid-Atlantic. We have created a carve-out for solar energy. We are also just recently passed a bill to allow for offshore wind off the Atlantic coast, and the Interior Department should be putting that out for sale of those leases at the end of, or sometime coming up here in 2013. So these are all of the things that we're pursuing. We recently, informed by experience, had to adjust and improve our greenhouse gas reduction goals. We were on a course to hit a 17% reduction rather than the 25%. So we've had to dial that up, and we will likely be raising our renewable energy portfolio standard from 20% to 25%. So these are some of the things we're doing. They're all the product of choice, not chance. It is the intention of setting a goal, but it's also putting together not only the right policies, but common platforms so that every citizen, every consumer can measure whether or not we're making more progress this week towards our goals than we were last week. And then those are the things we're doing in our state.
I like that, choice, not chance. That's fabulous. Governor Schwarzenegger, in 2011, you were honored by ACOR as a Renewable Energy Leader of the Decade. You've used a number of tools, including executive orders, to advance policy, positioning California as a leader in renewable energy. And more recently, there was an article in the Financial Times where you used Toyota as an example, referencing their 83% share of the hybrid vehicle industry. And let me just offer you your quote. "We must create an energy policy for the future. We cannot fall behind." Now, I need to know what your message is for our current policy makers.
Well, I think that when I became governor of California, I saw the opportunity to really continue on with the environmental work that has been done in the past. California, we made a decision to bring Democrats and Republicans together, and the private sector and the public sector, like Governor Granholm was talking about how important that is, to bring both together, and also the financial institutions and academic institutions and ordinary citizens, to bring everyone together. And I think because of that partnership, California is now 40% more energy efficient than the rest of the country. Just to show you how much that is, it's an equivalent, if the whole United States would be as energy efficient as California, we could close 75% of all the coal-fired power plants. That's like an equivalent of taking 187 million cars off the road. So this is how advanced California is. So I wanted to continue with that work, and this is why, we passed, laws with the Green Building Initiative, the million solar roofs we created in California, the low carbon fuel standard, but the renewables, you talked about 33% renewables California has, or our goal is 33% of renewables, but that's without hydro. If you add hydro, it's 48%. We will be at 48% by the year 2020. So we just don't add hydro because the environmentalists feel more comfortable if we don't add hydro. But I mean, the reality is it is a renewable, and it ought to be included in that. And of course, we also made a commitment to reduce the greenhouse gases by 25% by the year 2020, and by 85% by the year 2050. And we have built, during these years that I was in office, one giant solar plant after the next in our deserts. And also we built the first transmission line that transmits only renewable power. So we're the first state to do that. So there was great progress made, and we have seen that at the same time that there was really no leadership coming from Washington, and also that anyone that was hoping and dreaming about an international treaty, a Kyoto 2, every year they are disappointed that it doesn't happen. The danger is that everyone is waiting and is frozen and is waiting for this international agreement or for some law to change in Washington, that Washington eventually will have an environmental policy or will have eventually some energy policy, which we don't have. But I always said that the states have a tremendous amount of power to actually create laws and leadership, not just to implement, but to create laws and to show leadership and to move forward. And you have seen two examples right here with Maryland and with Illinois, with Michigan, and it is wonderful to see that, because we have seen so many partners. 14 other states joined us, even though we were sued by the federal government. Think about that. When we came to a conclusion to reduce our tailpipe emission standards and to improve on those, the federal government said, you cannot do that. We don't give you a waiver because greenhouse gases are not a pollutant. Think about that. Now we had to go to court, and we had to sue the federal government and say, well, greenhouse gases are a pollutant. So it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then eventually the Supreme Court decided, yes, greenhouse gases is a pollutant. I mean, duh. I mean, how much does it take to figure that out? I mean, I would have had an easier way to do it, to just take some of those conservative thinking people, to strap them to an exhaust pipe of a car, turn on the engine for an hour, and they would have figured it out themselves that after an hour that it is a pollutant. But I mean, that's a little bit of drastic kind of a thing, I understand that. So we have to go the normal, the legal route for things like that. But so I since then, since I've seen firsthand the power of subnational governments, of cities and states, we have even created an organization, the R20. and we have now over 500 members there of subnational governments to promote the idea that we should not wait for an international treaty or for federal governments, but we should just show leadership on the local level, because all great movements have been successful because they started on a grassroots level,
Yes.
on a local level. If it is the anti-apartheid movement, if it is the women's suffrage movement, if it is the civil rights movement, the independence movement in India, none of them started at any capital. They all started on the grassroots level. And so I think that we have to do the same thing with our environmental movement and with our environmental crusade.
And you're shaking your head, Governor. Go ahead.
Yeah, and let me just follow up on this, because I think we would all agree the action is in the states. And so the question is, how do you get all the states to act? Because you could craft a national energy policy from the bottom up. You could incentivize the states to all have at least a baseline of a renewable portfolio standard. You could incentivize the states and respect their geography and their history and their governors if you challenged the govs. Now this is from, if you did like a race to the top for clean energy jobs, like the race to the top for education. Race to the top for education had 48 states, Democrats and Republicans, sign on to essentially create a college prep curriculum for their students. Republicans and Democrats. Why? Because that policy respected the states and said you can opt in. You don't have to do it, but 48 states did it. So you effectively created a national education policy from the bottom up. You could do the same thing on energy. Every state has something different to offer. Every state could say, this is what I'm going to do on jobs. This is what I'm going to do on busting through the barriers that the bureaucracy exists inside the bureaucracy. Here's what I'm going to do on making sure grid connections are smooth, that the management of electricity from distribution to transmission works. You could give states a reward for working together. A little pot of money. I'm telling you, governors are so cash hungry, we would bend over backwards to get our state legislatures to change laws or to get our public utility commissions to change regulatory schemes if there were a challenge to the govs. I'm just saying.
Just saying, Governor O'Malley. And you're there. The theme around solutions comes from the notion that the states are the incubators for potential policy at the federal level. And I think it's important for us, recognizing that there are some challenges there, to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about why you became a champion and what you think the opportunities are going forward. You know, where are we going with this? Are you ready to take this challenge that Governor Granholm outlines?
We decided in Maryland to be a leader for two reasons. I mean, one is science, and the second is jobs. And I'm not sure which you'd put first and which you'd put second. I mean, we have an imperative. We have to figure out how we create a more secure energy future so that we are not burning up the planet, so we are not creating these violent, severe weather events, not to mention the drought and everything else that comes with the growth in our population on this planet and our traditional use of fossil fuels. But we also have an imperative to create jobs, to expand opportunity, to restore that balance, especially in our country, where people can look their children in the eyes and be assured that because of their hard work, their children are going to enjoy a better quality of life and not a lesser quality of life. So that's why we got into this. But I think that the fact that I think there is something very encouraging happening in our country right now when you look at the individual states. And now we have a bit of a track record so that we can see, what did you do in your state that actually worked? How were you able to measure that it was actually working? What were the combinations of regulatory nudges, policies, laws that you were able to pass to give the private sector and investors the confidence that this was not some sort of passing fad that would go away with the next administration, but that there was a public consensus and a public will that when you set the goals, you were actually going to do the necessary and tough things to achieve those goals. That's all exciting stuff, and it's happening in many of the states. Now, some states still are trying to deny that there is this change happening in our economy, but those states are going to be losing out on the jobs and opportunities we create by embracing the future rather than trying to run away from it.
So what you describe is a sustainable future for clean energy. You believe that we have some momentum. And with that said, let me turn to, I finally have a question from the audience. And this is a role that you see going forward for young people to play in the clean energy economy, and how can we encourage education, skills, and training for these new industries going forward?
I'm glad to take a whack at that.
Okay.
Very quickly, we have, in addition to moving forward with the Common Core curriculum in our state public schools, we have also integrated into that Common Core a requirement of environmental literacy. In other words, to make sure that we integrate in every grade a deeper and better understanding of how our activities as human beings interact with the other living systems of this earth. The second thing that we've begun to do is to change our workforce development programs so that they are directed and led by industry sectors. That's a big change from the sort of bureaucratic, top-down, mandated, big programmatic, instead to looking at the sectors, whether in this case green energy or energy efficiency technologies, and asking the sector, what are the skills that you actually need? How can we most productively create those skills in order to fill the jobs that are in demand? So those are a couple of things we're doing, as well as dialing up our career and technical education to meet the needs of the 21st century.
Well, and please.
On this, one is I think young people can get involved by, I would also say, making sure that you're involved in deciding who your leaders are. If you care about this issue of energy, making sure that you are walking the talk by getting everybody to put people in office who will be supportive of policies that get us there. That's number one. Number two, I just want to completely agree with Governor O'Malley about workforce training stuff. In Michigan, we had so many laid off auto workers. We created something because the Federal Department of Labor gave us a bunch of waivers to allow us to craft our own system. And we called it No Worker Left Behind. And we basically gave every laid off worker in the middle of this meltdown in the auto industry and the manufacturing sector, the opportunity to sign up for 2 years of training in a community college, $5,000 per year that we would pay, but the catch was that they had to agree to be trained in an area of need, in an area that was relevant to what the business community wanted. They couldn't get degrees in French or political science. Those are my degrees, so I can say that. They could get degrees in something like renewable energy technologies or healthcare. That changing of our workforce laws, and I think you know the new Department of Labor head, right?
I do.
I think we should be talking to him.
He was
about
well
that.
trained. I regret I have
Yes.
but one cabinet to give to my country. Tom Perez.
Yeah, that's great. Anyway, just to reinforce that.
So, you know, I'm encouraged by the commentary. I'm encouraged by what each of you have done in your individual states. But for those of us who are on the ground, working through the advocacy platform, we know that there's been pushback, and there continues to be pushback. We're looking at an effort, as an example, to roll back the RPS in a number of states. I mean, how do we deal with the obstacles, with the downside of this? We need to know how to get past these obstacles, and surely you have some examples that will be helpful to the audience.
Well, in 2010, oil companies and coal companies from outside the state of California have started spending millions of dollars in California to take our environmental laws out and to suspend them through an initiative process. And we got together again Democrats and Republicans. As a matter of fact, one of your next speakers, Tom Steyer, was one of the great supporters of that, and Secretary George Shultz and myself and Democratic leaders all got together, and we traveled up and down the state, and we raised millions of dollars. As a matter of fact, we raised over $30 million, and we pushed back really hard. We did not let the oil companies or the coal companies from outside the state dictate to California what energy and what environmental policies we ought to have. And by doing so, we won when election day came. And as a matter of fact, by 22 or 23%, we beat the coal and the oil companies. So it was a very clear message that you can't push us around, that you're going to be terminated. And that's exactly what happened at that election day. So what is happening every day in Washington, where those powerful companies and lobbyists are pushing to let the lawmakers around in Washington, and this is why they don't get an energy policy going or an environmental policy going. They could not do that in California. And it was because, again, we brought everyone together. But there's one important message there, and we learned that we always think about that most of the people understand when you talk about the environment, when you talk about the rising sea levels, or the ice melting, and all of those, and the weather's changing, and the beetle-infested trees in Colorado. Well, all this sounds good to us and very important information, but the average folks, it doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. The thing that really put us over the top and made us beat the oil and the coal companies was a health issue. We put a spot on that showed the effect it has on the breathing and on the heart, and the lungs and heart on children. And the Heart-Lung Association put that spot on, and it really registered and was alarming for the people, and this is one of the reasons why we won. And this is why I always say that we are communicating on a one-legged stool. We always say environment. We got to have a clean environment. We got to have renewable energy, a future. That sounds good to certain people, but it doesn't sound good to everybody. And so this is why I think it is important that we operate with a four-legged stool. Yes, we can talk about the environment, but we got to talk about the health issue. We have 100,000 people a year dying in the United States every year because of pollution-related illnesses, and no one talks about it. We talk about the homicide rate, we talk about the suicide rate, we talk about how many people die on car accidents, drunk driving, the people that are dying in Afghanistan and in Iraq. All of those deaths together does not come up to 100,000. So from pollution, more than 100,000 people die every year, and no one talks about it. We started talking about it, so I think it's important to talk about that. The other thing is, as Governor O'Malley was talking about, job creation. And Governor Granholm talked about job creation. That's an important issue because we in California, through the green sector, we are creating 10 times more jobs than through any other sector. Job creation, everyone in the world, it doesn't matter where you go, loves to have a job. Well, we can create through a green economy great jobs, a lot of jobs, so let's go in that direction. The other thing that, for instance, Secretary George Shultz is very adamant about and why he's fighting for that is national security. Mm-hmm. Who wants to be relying on a foreign dictator, some wacky dictator that could turn off the oil from one day to the next? I don't want to rely on that. I mean, we are getting more than 50%, almost 60% of our fuel from overseas, from outside this country. That makes us vulnerable. We should not be in this vulnerable position. We should create renewable energy and alternative fuels, like, for instance, that the Navy is doing right now. They are buying, from SolarCyme, all this fuel that is algae-based fuel, mm-hmm. because they want to be half of their ships, they want to have running on this algae-based fuel because they don't want to be as vulnerable anymore in the future. So those are the issues that we need to talk about. All of a sudden, there's interesting issues that everyone can relate to rather than only talking about the environment.
So relatable messaging. Now,
that's right.
Michigan,
communication,
exactly.
communication. Look, I have gone through a big crusade for the last 45 years, which is the fitness crusade. And I knew that we had to change right from the beginning our message. And when we changed the message, all of a sudden now you can see weight rooms everywhere. Every hotel now has weight rooms, every university, every sports team, everyone is doing weight resistance training. Even the old folks, rehabilitation, everything is weight resistance training. 40 years ago, they said you will get a heart attack, you're going to get stupid if you train with weights, you're going to turn gay, and everything is going to be wrong and everything. And today, everyone is training with weights because the message became fine-tuned and it was the right message. And that's what we need to do with the environmental crusade. We got to have a better message and make the subject sexier and more attractive rather than guilt, where you say, don't use this big car, don't use a fireplace, don't use your jacuzzi. Oh my God, you have a flat screen TV. This is terrible. That uses a lot of...
No, really, tell me how you feel about it,
Use
Governor.
your jacuzzi, but have a solar panel. Use your flat screen TV, but have an energy efficient flat screen TV. Use your Hummer, but have an electric engine in there. Use it.
They don't even
That
make
is
them
really
anymore.
the bottom line. Use all of the things, do everything, but have the better technology, because the day the technology exists, let's go and promote new technology.
Okay, your fellow panelists want to weigh in, but we have to support that philosophy. So, go ahead, Governor O'Malley.
Rose, I just wanted to say, I totally agree with the truth that we need to frame this new world not in terms of how much less we all want in the future. It really has to be the frame about more and fuller and better and healthier lives, more economic opportunities and more jobs. We have fallen down by making it about guilt and about doing less. It's not about less for our kids. It's about more jobs, more opportunity, better health, and more security.
So I have one follow-up, because Governor Schwarzenegger, you're a moderate Republican, and your party has sort of left you. And the question is, how do we get more? I mean, these are all great messages. They are not Democratic messages or Republican messages. They're messages for us all. How do we get more Republicans on board?
You would never hear me get into that of saying Democrats or Republicans, because I know plenty of Democrats who don't follow the rules. As you know, that one of the biggest problems that President Obama has is that he has a lot of Democratic governors that come from coal-winning states and from corn states. And they don't like to make any changes. They like to keep pumping out that coal. So he has to tread very carefully on how to move forward with those guys. So it has nothing to do so much with Democrats versus Republicans. I think the important thing is that we educate and we let people know that even if someone says, hey, I think this is a bunch of garbage with this environmental stuff, then I say, well, wouldn't you like to have more jobs? Yeah, I like jobs. Well, going green and having a green economy will produce more jobs. Oh, I'm interested in that. So you got to just use different angles rather than just always keep plowing away and having the same message. And you have to have an upbeat and a positive message. Look, I mean, I remember when the movie came out, this was way back, Saturday Night Fever. I remember there was no government agency involved or anything like this. When that movie came out, disco dancing became so big that all over the world they were building tens of thousands of discotheques, and everyone was disco dancing, and everyone burned more calories and did more fitness during this time. And I'm running around promoting fitness, and here there was one movie that did more than anyone could ever do. There was no laws passed or anything like this. So we got to make it attractive, and we got to connect with the people. Everyone always talks about, that here's what we need to do, and this is what happens to the world in 50 years from now. But if we walk away from here today, for instance, and don't tell the average folks out there, what can you do to participate and be part of this great crusade? We have failed, because we then talk and talk and talk, and we never go out there. That's why it's important to let people know you can make decisions of what kind of a car that you drive, what kind of a technology is inside the hood. Does it go 60 miles an hour or does it just go 10 miles an hour? You can make the decision if you want to have solar panels on your house and on your jacuzzis. You can take all the jacuzzis that you want. You can make the decision to buy an energy efficient flat screen TV. You can make the decisions to be more energy efficient and to turn off that air condition when you leave your house, and then remote through your phone, iPhone can turn it on again an hour before you go in through technology. You can make all of those decisions. People just don't know the things that they can do in order to participate and be part of this crusade and really feel good about it rather than feeling negative about it.
Well, I want to advance this conversation around messaging. And all campaigns are not created equal. We know that we now use, more often than not, strategies that you use in a political campaign we're using to try to advance this grassroots philosophy that you're speaking to. But Governor, in Michigan we had an initiative, and while it created a tremendous amount of momentum, the result wasn't what we'd hoped for. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Michigan has a renewable portfolio standard now of 10% only by 2015, which is a modest amount. And that happened in 2007, I think. I signed it into law in negotiating with a legislature that was very much opposed to government mandates. And so I had to enlist the utility companies and bring around a huge bipartisan effort to try to get this through. It was a tough sell. The legislature was not willing to go to 20%, so a number of people were excited about putting 20% by 2020 on the ballot. And in fact, it was funded pretty well. But the unfortunate thing, this is a little bit of a fluke, is that it was on the ballot with a whole bunch of other ballot proposals that were very, it was a bedsheet ballot, and there was a campaign to say, just say no to all of the ballot proposals, and so all of them went down as a result. So I think if it were standalone, it would fly, although I think there would be opposition. But it gets to the point of who funds the opposition to those. Yeah, it is obviously the oil companies, like in California, but also unless we make this proposition a good business case for the utilities, it's probably not going to fly either. And so the question is, how can we make sure in all of these states that the utilities are in the game, like they are in California? I'm sure they are in, in Maryland as well. And how do we make the business case? So, for example, when California decoupled their energy usage from rates, that caused huge amount of energy efficiency, and it was in the best interests of the utility companies because they were rewarded for the energy that wasn't used. And so that's the kind of thinking, I think, that can get much more rollout of higher renewable portfolio standards, higher efficiency standards across the country, if it's done in partnership a bit with those who have to stand up to their investors and say, this is what our return on investment is.
So,
just mentioned in California, the oil companies. I want to reiterate again that it was outside from the state of California, coal and oil companies that were attacking our policy, not within a state. For instance, Chevron, who is a California company, they helped us build our hydrogen highway. I went to the head of Chevron and said, can you help us with the money? We want to build hydrogen fueling stations so that hydrogen-fueled cars can have fueling stations. And they said, absolutely. We put together a map, and out of the 27 or 30 fueling stations that we built, half of them they financed. So they were very helpful. So we never villainized oil companies. We just villainized those that were trying to take out our environmental laws. But oil companies, we need oil. There is no such thing as, you can only villainize something that you want to get rid of from one second to the next. You don't want to get rid of oil from one second to the next because we would collapse as an international economy. We would not be able to survive. We need the oil. What we need to do is we need to make oil companies be part of the solution and to start investing in renewable energy, in solar, in wind, and in algae-based fuel and things like that, so that they have a more interesting portfolio rather than just living off the oil.
So Governor O'Malley, we have some members of our state legislature here. You are a sitting governor. The dynamic between your office and the legislature becomes very important when you're trying to identify and advance these laws that we're talking about that provide the framework for clean energy, and you've been fairly successful. I'd like to have you share with us some of your perspective on how you interact with the legislative body and how that helps to advance these technologies.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I'm very blessed to be able to serve the people of Maryland. And the people of Maryland do have, perhaps because of their proximity to the Chesapeake Bay, they do have an understanding of this new future and of our responsibility and the imperative that we share to create more jobs and more opportunity by embracing a clean energy future. So that's the most important thing. In working with the legislature, I'm also blessed because they send representatives that reflect their opinions. But having said that, every state has been going through this recession where no issue is more important than the jobs that people have today. And it's really difficult, especially when you look at the hits that American manufacturing has taken and the amount of energy they use, to sit down with people who are understandably fearful of their sector losing jobs in the way the economy is, if they cannot see how they fit in the economy that is to be. And so everything about our efforts has been about framing it in this, in the words of prosperity and the goal of job creation and greater opportunity. So yes, we do have a lot of ongoing sort of roundtable discussions, not only with utility, but also with labor, and also with our big energy users about how we move to this future. There are tons of issues, but the one that we all agree upon is that we want our children to have more opportunities than we have had, and we want them to have a healthier future than we have had. And that's what we keep bringing it back to. The second important thing that we do, I think, and that's important for keeping together this consensus, is to make sure we measure our performance and our progress openly and transparently so that every citizen in our state can see whether or not what we're doing is working in order to achieve our goals and also to create more jobs. Once you arrive at that sort of ethic, if you will, that we're all in this together and that we're holding one another accountable and that we're actually measuring the reality of our situation rather than the hopes or the dreams, people have a lot more confidence that they can be a part of this new story.
The interesting thing about individual state efforts is that we see progress within the boundaries of our own states. There is also, I think, an important goal, and that is regional collaboration. And so there's a question here about regional collaboration and how each of you would approach that, or have you approached it, and what sort of successes have you seen?
Let me jump on that because obviously the energy resources do not know geopolitical lines. And so if you want to have a sun effort, it would be great for the solar states to band together on both the manufacture of solar panels and the generation of the power and the distribution of that power. I mean, you know, Maryland can lead the country in the production of offshore wind turbines, but with the Atlantic coast states in the deployment of that energy. Michigan and maybe Tennessee, who's also got Nissan doing the lithium-ion battery, or we could do offshore wind from the Great Lakes. Every state has some resource. Every state is in partnership with its surrounding states. So how do you foster collaboration when the current economic model in the country is that governors go to other states to poach jobs and bring them back? You know, Rick Perry's notorious for leaving Texas and coming to California and saying, you know, come here. What a terrible, and we all do it, but it's a terrible national jobs strategy. It's like moving the chairs around on the deck of the Titanic. So the question is, how do you foster cooperation and allow the regions to excel based upon their resources? I think that too could be something that Congress could help with if they respected the states. If you had something that rewarded states for working together, just a little something, it doesn't even have to be, you know, I mean, Race to the Top was $4.5 billion, which is 1/10 of 1% of federal spend. It's basically budget dust. I mean, if you did something like that, pulling it from somewhere, repatriate some of those offshore profits, put it into an infrastructure bank, and have that be what incentivizes collaboration among states and the development of technologies that are unique unique to those particular regions, then you would start to see a national energy strategy, and you would have respected the states, respected collaboration, and we wouldn't be so passive as we are right now.
Well, I think that I've seen exactly what you said. I mean, governors come to California all the time, and they want to steal jobs, and they want to go and
I did it.
There's more movies.
When you were governor,
exactly.
come over to Michigan.
And you know something? I welcomed you. I mean, it's perfectly fine. I mean, if you are competitive, and we always felt in California that we had more to offer than you in Michigan, so therefore I said people would stay in California.
I would want to arm wrestle with that, but that wouldn't be a good idea, would it?
So that was perfectly fine. But at the same time, as you did that, we worked together on environmental issues. You adopted a lot of the ideas that we had in California. We adopted a lot of the ideas that you guys were doing in Michigan. And so I think we all worked together. So you can be competitive, but still work together. I think the sad story is on the federal level. Because on the federal level, when they go around and they say, well, let someone else do it first. Why should the United States be the first one to go with an environmental policy? Let the Russians do it first, or let the Chinese. Since when did America ever take that approach? Let someone else be number one economically.
Yes.
Let someone else be number one militarily. Let someone be number one with human rights. With none of those issues, we always led the way. Right. Why are we all of a sudden saying, let someone else lead the way? I mean, it's outrageous. It's not patriotic. I think America is the number one country in the world, and we should lead the way also on environmental issues.
Agreed. I unfortunately now see those horrible red zeros, which means that we are done. I'd like to thank you, governors, Governor Granholm, Governor O'Malley, Governor Schwarzenegger, very much for joining us for the 6.0 National Clean Energy Summit. Thank you, audience. Please help me thank them.
Thank you.
Thank you.